Well, hey there, you're on the internet, I have some free time, and welcome to the Triple N Network, where all you newbie nib nerds can find all the news you'll need. Let's look at an ink today, shall we? Now, today's ink is lies. The whole thing is lies. Yes, it is DeAtramentis Sahara Grey. And everything about that name is weird and misleading, because it is green. It's a weird, smoky green, but like a light smoky green. It's confusing. I will preface with saying I have absolutely nothing that looks anything even remotely like this ink. Now, of course, it is green, not gray, and it's not even a deserty green. I don't know where the heck they got that name from, but yeah, I have it in sample form. Now, the two pens that I used for these tests are a Pilot Vanishing Point with a broad nib, which tends to be just slightly wet, not obscenely wet, and a Parker Vector in fine. And these vectors are actually known for being quite dry writing, and I'd say this one is generally. Yeah, I don't have anything like this. So here are some other inks that are not like this at all. Here's Sahara Grey. Here's Private Reserve Sepia, which just had some weird sort of textural qualities, and like, is it brown, is it gold, is it, I don't know what. So there's that, and then Noodler's Golden Brown, which also had some like green undertones to it. So, but yeah, that's not like it either. Here's Diamond's Golden Brown, which had like tiniest little hints of green in it and had a weird texture, I don't know. And then I thought, okay, well, maybe Sepia Musk Green, but that is not even remotely like it at all. So, anyways, let's check out the chromatography. Now, this chromatography is insane. I hope you can see this. I don't know if the camera's going to be able to handle this yellow, because it is actually highlighter yellow. It looks like a highlighter. It is a bright, vibrant yellow, coming off of this gray, and then there's like the teeniest little hints of green in the gray. So you can see where the initial drop was put, but this, I mean, this is an insane color. And then I let it dry, which is not how you're supposed to do it, but you can tell that there is a much darker dot where it was initially put, and then you have this weird, like, the yellow actually started to try and like come down, which was insane. But yeah, crazy yellow insanity. Now, I thought I'd see how this ink could stand up to different things. So here's water, where it got a bit lighter, and so you can see some of that gray, but here's denatured alcohol, which did not do a gosh darn thing. Hydrogen peroxide, which kind of just smeared it around a bit. Ammonia pen flush, which certainly did break it up a bit, but yeah. And then bleach, which turned it pink. So, yeah. You know, like you do. Now, somebody asked me recently, so I'm going to start out and say this. I have discovered something that I've come to call DAtramentous Syndrome. Now, what is DAtramentous Syndrome? That is that when you leave a DeAtramentis ink in a pen, or the longer it's been out of a container, whether it's a bottle or a vial, the worse the performance gets. In fact, it's a pretty like steady exponential increase in poor performance. I had intended to put this in pens and start the test, you know, maybe a couple hours later. I ended up getting distracted by surgery, and so it actually waited in these pens for about 4 days. DeAtramentous Syndrome is when there's more bleed, more feather, more spread. It essentially makes the ink more aggressive the longer it's out of its vial or bottle. And we most certainly see that here. Now, first test, Clairefontaine 90 grams per square meter. I'll try and hold this still. I doubt I need to bring this even closer because I bet you can already see it. You see that? I mean, this is really dense paper. This is 90 grams. You see how it's already got like that woolly texture? And I'm sure you'll see it. See some of this feathering, this intense woolliness that's coming through? Yeah, not encouraging. And another thing is, this is probably one of the wettest inks I have ever encountered. In fact, this is the most wet ink I can remember encountering off the top of my head. Now, a 10 out of 10 would be like if you were holding the fountain pen and you could see that like ink was like actually gathering as if it were about to fall. This one was a 7.5 out of 10. I mean, it looked like it just barely had enough self-control to not drip out on its own. It was so wet. And so, yeah, the generally quite fine, or dry fine writing nib took 10 seconds, but look at that smear. And the broad, which admittedly is already just slightly wet, took 16, and look at that smear. I mean, it's insane. But, I mean, I don't know if the camera will let this through because, I mean, it is a fairly light colored ink, but it is nearly coming through on this dense paper. Now, bear in mind, there's a very powerful light coming down in this direction. This is what I mean by DeAtramentous syndrome. It gets aggressive. It gets really intense. Now, there is some very intense shading, and so you do see sort of that separation of like green and yellow. For some reason, my camera's making it look much more yellow, depending on how the light hits it. It's really this green. But, yeah, keep it fresh, people. Keep it fresh. Now, you do see what we saw in the chromatography where there is this dark green-gray at the center and then the yellow washes off. And it's kind of fun that you can very distinctly see the yellow separation. It did dye the page. It did feather a bit, but yeah. Alright. Next up, Rhodia. 80 grams per square meter. It's so wet. I mean, oh my god. But yeah, the generally dry fine took 10 seconds. The slightly wet broad took 17, but look at that smear. And again, I mean, this is fairly dense paper. Yeah, it's very, I mean, it even has a ceramic coating, but that didn't save it. I mean, you still get this wooliness. You still get a bit of shading, but it's just too aggressive. I mean, some of this, you can actually see full-on feathering, and that's a fine. It's, yeah, it's trouble. Now, there's very near full bleed through again in several spots. Granted, it is with the broad, but still, I mean, this paper can generally handle broads just fine. So, it's not great. And it definitely dyed the page here. I mean, this is just gone all yellow. And yet, I mean, of course, the broad puts down more ink, so there's more to remain. But, yeah, there's still some stuff at the center. You definitely see the yellow separation. Next up is Tomoe River Paper, which tends to draw out dry times anyway. It also brings out shading, which you most certainly get here. You definitely start to see a halo effect. You do see, you know, like a bit of, yeah, so like there versus there. Definitely do get some shading. Yeah, but that generally dry writing fine took 18 seconds to dry. And the broad took 27, and I'm going to bring this in close because I hope you can see it. I mean, I didn't even gather all of the ink on my finger when I went to smear it, and it still pooled up. I mean, that's just nuts. Now, finally, we don't see any of that feathering or bleeding or spread or sheen, but that's because this stuff is, I don't know, it's like alien technology. Something about this paper just doesn't allow that stuff, but yeah, maybe it'll always look this good when it's fresh on other papers. Who knows? But it is still an aggressive acting ink, and this is very thin paper, so you do get, like, when it seeped into the paper, it definitely went in there. It didn't come out the other side, but it definitely went in. Now, this ink loves to let ink slide, or this paper loves to ink, I can't talk today. Anyways, added water, this is what happens. It didn't dye the page so much, but also what's there is actually quite clear and quite dark. The camera's lighting it up for some reason. But yeah, if you had to recover that, you could. So that's nice. Now, for the next 3 tests, I only used the fine vector, except to write the name. But even that didn't really do it much of a favor. Yeah, so this is the world's worst 20-pound copier paper. And it took 1.5 seconds to dry, which says something because this is very absorbent paper. And in fact, I mean, you can see how absorbent it is because it soaked in and it became kind of woolly. My camera's really turning this yellow. This is weird. Anyways, I shall fix it in post. Now there's no shading, really. I mean, I say there's 2%, but I'm really struggling to see it. There is a ton of spread. So if we look at the line width here versus here, the line got, I mean, it looks like I'm writing with a full European medium, and then it still feathers. It's not great. And then, I don't know if the camera's going to pick this up because it's this yellow, but it's nearly coming through all over, and it seeped in really deep. I mean, it actually physically came through with the broad, where I wrote the name. It's intense. But again, I mean, you still see that stuff at the center that's quite dark in there, the gray, but then the yellow's washing off. It did dye the page, but I don't know. If your life was depending on it, I think you could recover that. Next up is Mead Notebook Paper, where it took 1.5 seconds to dry. Now, a lot of times this paper will outperform the 20-pound copier paper, but I think that wet flow and that aggressive ink sort of just made them come out even. You do get a great deal of spread. You do get feathering. That is a problem. And since this paper is physically thinner than 20-pound copier paper, you do get stuff where it's nearly, okay, that's the broad. You do get stuff that nearly comes to the other side. Now, again, what's at the center is actually quite dark and quite there, and what's interesting is you can really see the yellow separating from that here. So, that's kind of fun. Now, lastly is Moleskine notebook paper, which acts like it hates ink on its good days, so an aggressive ink like this is definitely going to have problems. Now, most certainly in the broad you can see this insane amount of feathering. I mean, that's nuts. But I mean, even here on the fine, it feathers like crazy. I just don't know if you can see the feathers because the ink is so light. But yeah, it took 7 seconds to dry. And this is obviously absorbent paper because you can see how this took on the texture of wet wool, right? Look how much that's smeared. Yeah, it's just a mess. But interestingly, there's no full bleed. You do get some intense like echo throughout, but even the broad didn't quite make it to the other side. So weirdly well behaved in that regard. Usually it doesn't do that. Usually this is the first one to bleed. But yeah. Water test, again, what's at the center is actually kind of dark in there, but it did feather and explode, so that's not great. But yeah, so there you go. There's DeAtramentis Sahara Grey. It's green. It definitely suffers from DAtramentous Syndrome. So, as always, keep it fresh. It's weird. I don't know what to make of this. Please share your experiences in the comments down below. For your consideration from the Triple N Network. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel. And thanks for watching. Bye.